Welcome back. Businesses in Canada are grappling with slower growth. So what can be done to encourage smaller firms to expand? Well, here's a look at the landscape for small and mid-sized businesses by the numbers. First, they may be small, but they're mighty. Small business in Canada made up 98% of all employer businesses in 2022, employing 10.7 million Canadians, or almost two-thirds of the total. Medium-sized businesses, or those with 100 to 500 employees, employed 3.6 million Canadians, representing 21% of employed people. Really small businesses, those with fewer than 20 employees, are most concerned about inflation and rising debt costs, while slightly larger firms were most worried about finding and recruiting skilled staff. About two-thirds of them said that was their number one concern. Most firms plan to keep hiring levels, about 80% of businesses surveyed, while 13.5% of them expected to increase staff this year, and 6.4% plan to have layoffs. Despite the value of startups, Canada has 100,000 fewer entrepreneurs today than 20 years ago, according to BDC. The good news is that 14% of the population secretly wishes they could start a business. Unfortunately, only 1 in 1,000 will actually start one. And with fewer people starting businesses, that could spell trouble. 1/3 of new businesses close within 5 years. Well, a declining number of entrepreneurs is alarming enough, but it's happening at a time when even existing companies aren't investing in their own future. So what happened to Canada's culture that makes us so risk-averse these days? Pierre Cléroux is Chief Economist at BDC. Thanks for being with us.
Good afternoon.
So BDC's data is a bit alarming, right? So many fewer entrepreneurs now than 20 years ago. We know just because of the way businesses are formed and many of them die off naturally, we do need this natural kind of rebirth. It's not happening, Pierre. Why do you think that is?
Well, there's a number of reasons. The first reason is the job market is really good. So people have different options. If you get a good offer for a job, the incentive to start your own business is not as appealing. Another reason is we have an aging population. Typically, people start their business between the age of 25 and 45. And this cohort is really declining in Canada. So that's another reason why we don't have as many startups as we used to be.
Are there things you think that governments could do to be more supportive of entrepreneurs that we don't already do?
Well, a lot of research is showing that it's becoming more and more difficult to be an entrepreneur. There's much more regulation, more red tape, more difficulties. So that's another disincentive to start a business. So it's not easy to do for government, but to make it easier to operate a business in Canada would go a long way.
You know, some of the things people talk about are the regulations, red tape. Is that true at the smallest level? BDC deals with small and medium-sized entrepreneurs and companies. Do they get concerned about the amount of kind of hurdles of paperwork and regulations they have to meet, or is that more of a bigger company issue?
Well, it's both. I would say, because just to start a business now, it's much more complicated. There's a lot of labor legislations. There's a lot of different laws. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have that, but we should be concerned at the government level not to impose too much of a burden, because we need more businesses. And also for larger, mid-sized businesses, we see a lot of them looking, to have more operation in the U.S. because it's easier. So it's for every business that it should be a bit easier to do business in Canada.
Are new Canadians, are immigrants, a source of kind of wealth for us when it comes to entrepreneurs? Are they folks who will start businesses in greater numbers?
They do, actually. In the proportion of people who are coming from outside the country, they're more likely to start a business than a Canadian born. Has been the case, but it continues to be like that. So we have more immigration than ever before, so that will help. But we need, like you said at the beginning, it's very important to have startups because they are responsible for a lot of innovation, and they push also more mature firms to innovate even more. So this is, in any healthy economy, you have a good size, a good number of startups that will push the economy in the right direction.
I guess the other strange silver lining to a slowdown in the economy, Pierre, is that if we see unemployment tick up, people might actually go out on their own. This would be their catalyst if they lose a job to start their own business?
It's true, actually. During every slowdown or recession, we see more startups because, for exactly what you said, people they're looking for different options. Maybe they lost their job and they are looking to be their own entrepreneur. So far, the unemployment rate is still low, but if the economy slow down even more, we might see that a little bit more.
Pierre, thanks so much for being with us. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Pierre Cléroux is Chief Economist at BDC. Governments have the power to do a lot of things, but when it comes to helping individuals, there are few things more powerful than a pro-growth agenda. But what exactly does that mean? Kevin Page is CEO of the Institute of Fiscal Studies and Democracy and a former parliamentary budget officer. Kevin, thanks for being with us.
Good to be with you, Amanda.
So, of course, we know a growth strategy is something all politicians talk about. It seems elusive, and Canada has a growth problem. Are there things you would say are actually kind of obvious, foundational things we should do to promote growth?
Yeah, I would say the biggest obvious foundational thing to promote growth, at least over the next year, is just better macroeconomic fundamentals. Getting inflation back down to target. Getting policy interest rates back down to trend. I think that would take off, it would correct a lot of problems we're having in the housing market right now and a lot of strain that consumers are feeling about their consumption decisions.
One of the things that's so interesting is we actually have reasonably accommodative tax policies to encourage businesses to invest, for instance, which should create growth. And yet Canadian businesses aren't investing. What does that suggest about how the policies might need to change or what we need to do differently?
I think we went through an enormous interest rate shock in 2022 and 23. I think there's a hope, in the business community from a planning perspective that we're at the peak of this interest rate cycle, that interest rates will move back down. I think they need to see that. I think you're right. I think real business capital formation has been flat. We've actually seen declines in residential construction. So I think there's just too many headwinds coming from interest rates and inflation.
One of the things, it's one of those kind of boring subjects that matters deeply is our falling productivity per worker. We're less productive than, for instance, the United States. Again, a long-term problem in Canada. Are there things you think, especially the federal government or maybe even provincial governments, should do to promote productivity, or is that at the business level?
Well, I think it needs to be at both. I think it really does start at the business level, but I think at least we need to see that this problem acknowledged. I think the way numbers were presented in the fall economic statement last week by Minister Phelan really underplayed just how weak these growth numbers are when you look at it at real GDP per capita. So first, it starts just with the recognition that this problem exists. And then, I think this issue really gets punted to the next election, Amanda, where we start really talking about a growth agenda and the kind of investment we're really going to need to actually boost growth. Because in a slow growth economy with rapidly increases in population, these productivity numbers have never looked so bad.
Absolutely. Of course, we still do have inflation that's higher than anybody wants, especially in certain pockets. Do you feel like we can start to get close to feeling optimistic? It sounds like our central bank is, that we've done what needs to do to bring it to bear, that inflation's going to get lowered properly?
Yeah, it certainly feels like we're in a soft landing mode. I think you look at household balance sheets in particular, like you do see. The top 20% seem to be doing fine, but everybody below the top 20% are really seeing a lot of deterioration in their balance sheets since 2020. But I think I think affordability is still a big issue for politicians. We've seen the inflation rate is moving in the right direction, but these high price levels are really hurting consumers.
Mm-hmm. We're going to leave it there, Kevin. So good to have you. Appreciate your time today.
Good to be with you, Amanda, as always.
Kevin Page is CEO of the Institute of Fiscal Studies and Democracy and a former parliamentary budget officer. Coming up, another day, another constitutional dust-up over Canada's climate goals. Stay with us.